Good morning. All right, so this will be our last day of YouTube reading. So we will finish up Dear Mr. Henshaw today. It's not quite 10 o'clock yet, so I'm going to give it another about 2 minutes to let some people get logged in. So we can go over where Lee was really upset because he called his dad and he figured out that his dad had lost Bandit. So obviously he was very, very upset about that. And he also heard his dad, say to another, or have a child asked his dad, when they were going to order pizza, and mom wanted to know. And Lee then realized that his dad must be probably dating another woman, and this woman has a child. And I think that really hurt Lee because Lee is not getting the attention that he wants from his dad, yet he knows that his dad is giving attention to another young boy. So his heart is really heavy right now, and he's not feeling the greatest. And then he started to kind of feel bad because he thought, if I hadn't come along, mom and dad would still be riding in the truck and they'd be happy and they'd be married. And his mom let him know that that's not the life she wanted, that she wanted to be a mother, and she was happy to stop riding with dad and raise him. So that's kind of where we left off. And we are going to finish today. So let's be patient, and yes, this is live, Zach. And follow along. Here we go. Tuesday, February 6th. Today I felt so tired, I didn't have to try to walk slow on the way to school. I just naturally did. Mr. Fridley had already raised the flags when I got there. The California Bear was right side up, so maybe Mr. Fridley didn't need me to help after all. I just threw my lunch down on the floor, and I didn't care if anyone stole any of it. By lunchtime, I was hungry again, and when I found out my little cheesecake was missing, then I was mad all over again. I'm going to get whoever steals from my lunch, and then he'll be sorry. I'll really fix him, or maybe it's a her. Either way, I'll get even. I tried to start a story for young writers. I got as far as the title, which was Ways to Catch a Lunch Bag Thief. A mousetrap in the bag was all I could think of. And anyway, my title sounded too much like Mr. Henshaw's book. Today during spelling, I got so mad thinking about the lunch bag thief that I asked to be excused to go to the bathroom. As I went out into the hall, I scooped up the lunch bag closest to the door. I was about to drop kick it down under the hall when I felt a hand on my shoulder, and there was Mr. Fridley. What do you think you're doing? He asked. Go ahead and tell the principal, I said. See if I care. Well, maybe you don't, but I do. That surprised me. Mr. Fridley said, I don't want to see a boy like you get into trouble, and that's where you're headed. I don't have any friends in this rotten school. Who wants to be friends with someone who scowls all the time? Asked Mr. Fridley. So you've got problems. Well, so does everyone else, if you take the trouble to notice. And I thought of Dad up in the mountains, chaining up 8 heavy wheels in the snow. And I thought of Mom squirting deviled crab into hundreds of little cream puff shells and making billions of tiny sandwiches for golfers to gulp, and wondering if Catering by Katie would be able to pay her enough to pay the rent. Turning into a mean-eyed lunch kicker won't help anything, said Mr. Fridley. You've got to think positively. How? I asked. That's for you to figure out, he said. Nobody noticed me put the lunch bag back on the floor. So Lee was about to drop standards and become someone he's really not because he's angry. And luckily his teacher caught him and turned him around. Wednesday, February 7th. Today after school, I felt so rotten, I decided to go for a walk. I wasn't going any special place. I was just walking. I had started down the street past the paint store and antique shops and bakery and all those places on, and past the post office, when I came to a sign that said butterfly trees. I heard a lot about those trees where monarch butterflies fly thousands of miles to spend the winter. I followed arrows until I came to a grove of mossy pine and eucalyptus trees with a sign saying quiet. There was a big sign that said warning, $500 fine for messing with butterflies in any way. I had to smile. Who would want to mess with a butterfly? The place was so quiet, almost like a church, that I tiptoed. The grove was shady, and at first, I thought all the signs about butterflies must be some kind of ripoff for tourists, because I only saw 3 or 4 monarchs. Then I discovered some of the branches looking strange, as if they were covered with little brown sticks. Then the sun came out from behind a cloud. The sticks began to move, and slowly they opened wings and turned into orange and black butterflies, thousands of them quivering on one tree. Then they began to float off through the trees into the sunshine. You can kind of see a picture. Those clouds of butterflies were so beautiful. I felt good all over and just stood there watching them until the fog began to roll in. And the butterflies came back and turned into brown sticks again. They made me think of a story Mom used to read to me about Cinderella returning from the ball. I felt so good, I ran all the way home, and while I was running, I had an idea for my story. I also noticed that some of the shops had metal boxes that said alarm system up near the roof. So does the gas station next door. I wonder what's in those boxes. Thursday, February 8th. Today, when I came home from school, I leaned over the fence and yelled at a man who works in the gas station. Hey, Chuck, what's in that box that says alarm system on the side of the station? Batteries, Chuck told me. Batteries and a bell. Batteries are something to think about. I started another story, which I hope will get printed in the Young Writer's Yearbook. I think I will call it The 10-Foot Waxmen. All the boys in my class are writing weird stories full of monsters, lasers, and creatures. Girls seem to be writing mostly poems or stories about horses. In the middle of working on my story, I had a bright idea. If I took my lunch in a black lunchbox, the kind men carry, and got some batteries, maybe I really could rig up a burglar alarm. Friday, February 9th. Today I got a letter from Dad, postmarked Albuquerque, New Mexico. At least I thought it was a letter, but when I tore it open, I found a $20 bill and a paper napkin. He had written on the napkin, "Sorry about Bandit. Here's $20. Go buy yourself an ice cream cone, Dad." I was so mad I couldn't say anything. Mom read the napkin and said, "Your father doesn't actually mean you should go buy an ice cream cone." Well, then why'd he write it, I asked. That's his way of trying to say he's really sorry about Bandit. He's just not good at expressing his feelings. Some men aren't, you know. What am I supposed to do with $20? Keep it, said Mom. It's yours. It'll come in handy. When I asked if I had to write a thank you to Dad, Mom gave me a funny look and said, "It's up to you." Tonight I worked hard on my story for the young writers about the 10-foot waxman and decided to save the $20 towards a typewriter. When I got to be a real author, I'll need a typewriter. February 15th. So now he's back to writing to Mr. Henshaw. Okay, so remember the last things we just read, that was Lee writing in his diary. Dear Mr. Henshaw, I haven't written to you for a long time because I know you are busy, but I need help with the story I am trying to write for the Young Writer's Yearbook. I got started, but I don't know how to finish it. My story is about a man 10 feet tall who drives a big truck, the kind my dad drives. The man is made of wax, and every time he crosses the desert, he melts a little. He makes so many trips and melts so much that he finally can't handle the gears or reach the brakes. This is as far as I've gotten. What should I do now? The boys in my class are writing about monsters. The kind of ending doesn't seem right to me, and I don't know why. Please help. Just a postcard will do. Hopefully, Lee Botts. P.S. Until I started trying to write a story, I wrote in my diary almost every day. February 28th. Dear Mr. Henshaw, thank you for answering my letter. I was surprised that you had trouble writing stories when you were my age. I think you're right. Maybe I'm not ready to write a story. I understand what you mean, though. A character in a story should solve a problem or change in some way. I can see that a waxman who melts until he's a puddle wouldn't be anything to solve. I suppose somebody could turn up on the last page and make candles out of him. That would change him all right, but it's not the ending I want. I asked Miss Martinez if I had to write a story for young writers. She said I could write a poem or a description. Your grateful friend, Lee. P.S. I bought a copy of Ways to Amuse a Dog at a garage sale. I hope you don't mind. Okay. Now, this next part is from the Diary of Lee Botts, Volume 2. Okay. So he's not writing to Mr. Henshaw. He's writing in his diary now. Thursday, March 1st. I am getting behind in this diary for several reasons, including working on my story and writing to Mr. Henshaw. Really, not just pretending. I also had to buy a new notebook because I filled up the first one. The same day, I bought a beat-up black lunchbox in the thrift shop down the street, and I started carrying my lunch in it. The kids were surprised, but nobody made fun of me because a black lunchbox is not the same as one of those square ones covered in cartoon characters. A couple of boys asked if it was my dad's. I just grinned and said, "Where do you think I got it?" The next day, my little slices of salami, rolled around cream cheese, were gone, but I expected that. But I'll get that thief. I'll make him really sorry he ate the best things out of my lunch. Next, I went to the library for books on batteries. I took out a couple of easy books on electricity. Really easy, because I've never given much thought to batteries. About all I know is that when you want to use a flashlight, the battery is usually dead. I finally gave up on my story about the 10-foot wax man, which was pretty dumb. I thought I would write a poem about butterflies for young writers, because a poem can be short, but it's hard to think about butterflies and burglar alarms at the same time. So I studied electricity books instead. The books didn't have directions for an alarm, but I learned enough about batteries and switches and insulated wires, so I think I could figure it out myself. Friday, March 2nd. Back to the poem tonight. The only rhyme I can think for butterfly is flutterby. I can think of rhymes like trees and breeze, which are pretty boring, and then I think of wheeze and sneeze. A poem about butterflies wheezing and sneezing seems silly. And anyway, a couple of girls are already writing poems about monarch butterflies that flutter by. Sometimes I start a letter to Dad thanking him for the $20, but I can't finish that either. And I don't know why. Saturday, March 3rd. Today I took my lunchbox and Dad's $20 to the hardware store and looked around. I found an ordinary light switch, a little battery, and a cheap doorbell. While I was looking around for the right kind of insulated wire, a man who had been watching me, boys my age always get watched when they go into stores, asked if he could help me. He was a nice old gentleman who said, "What are you planning to make, son?" Son. He called me son. My dad calls me kid. I didn't want to tell the man, but when he looked at the things I was holding, he grinned and said, "You're having trouble with your lunch, aren't you?" I nodded and said, "I'm trying to make a burglar alarm." He said, "That's what I guessed. I've had workmen in here with the same problem." It turned out I needed a 6-volt lantern battery instead of the battery I picked out. He gave me a couple tips, and after I paid for the things, a little slap on the back and said, "Good luck, son." I tore home with all the things I bought. First, I made a sign for my door that said, "Keep out, Mom. That means you." Then I went to work, fastening one wire from the battery to the switch and from the other side of the switch to the doorbell. Then I fastened a second wire from the battery to the doorbell. It took me a while to get it right. Then I taped the battery in one corner of the lunchbox and the doorbell in the other. I stood the switch up at the back of the box and taped that in place too. Here's where I ran into a problem. I thought I could take the wire clamp meant to hold a thermos bottle inside the lunch lid and hook it under the switch if I reached in carefully as I closed the box. But the clamp wasn't quite long enough. After some thinking and experimenting, I twisted a wire loop onto it. Then I closed the box just enough so I could get my hand inside and push the wire loop over the button on the switch before I took my hand out and closed the box. When I opened the box, my burglar alarm worked. The bell inside the box went off with a terrible racket that brought Mom to my door. "Lee, what on earth is going on in there?" she shouted above the alarm. I let her in and gave her a demonstration of my burglar alarm. She laughed and said it was a great invention, but one thing was bothering me. Would my sandwich muffle the bell? Mom must have been wondering the same thing because she suggested taping a piece of cardboard into the lid that would make a shelf for my sandwich. And I did that and it worked. I can't wait until Monday. Monday, March 5th. Today, Mom packed my lunch carefully, and we tried the alarm to see if it still worked. It did. When I got to school, Mr. Fridley said, "Nice to see you smiling, Lee. You should try it more often." I parked my lunchbox behind the partition and I waited. I waited all morning for the alarm to go off. Miss Martinez asked if I could mind my work, and I pretended I did, but all of the time I was really waiting for my alarm to go off so I could dash back behind the partition and tackle the thief. When nothing happened, I began to worry. Maybe the loop had somehow slipped off the switch on the way to school. Lunchtime came, but the alarm had not gone off. We all picked up our lunches and went off to the cafeteria. When I set my box on the table in front of me, I realized I had a problem, a big problem. If the loop hadn't slipped off the switch, my alarm was still triggered. I just sat there staring at my lunchbox, not knowing what to do. "How come you're not eating?" Barry asked. Barry's sandwiches are never cut in half, so he always takes a big bite out of one side to start. Everybody at the table was looking at me. I thought about saying I wasn't hungry, but I was. I thought about taking my lunchbox out into the hall to open it, but if the alarm was triggered, there was no way I could open it quietly. Finally, I thought, here it goes. I unsnapped the two fasteners on the lunchbox and held my breath as I opened up the lid. Wow, my alarm went off. The noise was so loud, it startled everybody at the table, including me, and made everyone in the cafeteria look around. I looked up and saw Mr. Fridley grinning at me over the garbage can. Then I turned off the alarm. Suddenly, everybody seemed to be noticing me. The principal, who always prowls around, keeping an eye on things at lunchtime, came over to examine my lunchbox. He said, "That's quite an invention you have there." "Thanks," I said. Some of the teachers came out of their lunchroom to see what the noise was all about. I had to give a demonstration. It seems I wasn't the only one who had things stolen from my lunch, and all the kids say they want lunchbox with alarms too, even those whose lunches were never good enough to have anything stolen. Barry said he would like an alarm like that on the door of his room at home. I began to feel sort of like a hero. Maybe I'm not so medium after all. One thing still bothers me, though. I still don't know who's been robbing my lunch. Tuesday, March 6th. Today, Barry asked me to come home with him to see if I could help him rig up a burglar alarm for his room, because he has a bunch of sisters and stepsisters who keep getting into his stuff. Barry lives in a big old house that's sort of cheerful and messy, with little girls running all over the place. As it turned out, Barry didn't have the right kind of battery, so we just fooled around looking at his models. Barry never uses directions when he puts models together because the directions are too hard and spoil the fun. He throws them away and figures out how to do the pieces by himself. I still don't know what to write for young writers, but I was feeling good, so I finally wrote to Dad to thank him for the $20. I had found a good use for it, even if I couldn't save it toward a typewriter. But I didn't say much. I wonder if Dad will marry the pizza boy and his mother. I worry about that a lot. Thursday, March 15th. This week, several kids turned up with lunchboxes and burglar alarms. You know that song about the hills ringing with the sound of music? Well, you might say our cafeteria rang with the sound of burglar alarms. The fad didn't last very long, and after a while, I didn't even bother to set my alarm. Nobody has robbed my lunchbox since I set it off that day. And I never did find out who the thief was. Maybe he was just somebody whose mother packed bad lunches, or maybe he had to pack his own lunches. I have seen people look into their lunches, take out cookies, and throw the rest in the garbage. I'm not saying robbing lunchboxes is right. I'm saying I'm glad I don't know who the thief was because I have to go to school with him. Friday, March 16th. Tonight I was staring at a piece of paper trying to think of something to write. When the phone rang, Mom told me to answer because she was washing her hair. It was Dad. My stomach felt as if it was dropping to the floor. "How you doing, kid?" he asked. "Fine." "Great." "I got your letter," he said. "That's good." His call took me so by surprise that I could feel my heart pounding, and I couldn't think of anything else to say until I said, "Have you found another dog to take Bandit's place?" When really I meant, "Have you found another boy to take my place?" "No, but I asked about him on my CB. He may turn up." "I hope so." This conversation was going no place. I really didn't know what to say to my father, and it was embarrassing. Then Dad surprised me. "Son, do you ever miss your old dad?" I had to think a minute. I missed him all the time, but I couldn't get the words out. My silence must have bothered him because he said, "Are you still there?" "Sure, Dad, I miss you," I told him. It was true, but not as true as it had been a couple months ago. "Sorry, I don't get over your way more often. I hear the sugar refinery in Spreckles is closing down." "I read about it in the paper," I said. "Is your mother handy?" he asked. "I'll see." "She's washing her hair," I said. "Tell her I'll manage to send your support check sometime next week. So long, kid. Keep your nose clean." "So long, Dad. Drive carefully." I guess he'll never learn that my name is Lee and that my nose is clean. Maybe he thinks I'll never learn that he drives carefully. He doesn't really. He's a good driver, but he needs to speed to make time when he can avoid the highway patrol. All truckers do. After that, I couldn't get back to thinking about young writers, so I picked up Ways to Amuse a Dog and read it for the thousandth time. I read harder books now, but I still feel good when I read that book. I wonder where Mr. Henshaw is. Saturday, March 17th. Today is Saturday, so this morning I walked to the butterfly trees again. Maybe they're starting to go north for the summer. I thought I might write about them in prose instead of poetry. But on the way home, I got to thinking about Dad and the one time he took me along when he was hauling grapes to a winery. And what a great day that had been. Tuesday, March 20th. Yesterday, Miss Neely, the librarian, asked if I had written anything for the Young Writers Yearbook because all the writing had to be turned in by tomorrow. When I told her I hadn't, she said I still had 24 hours, and why didn't I get busy? So I did. I would really like to meet a famous author. My story about the 10-foot waxman went into the wastebasket. Next, I tried to start a story called The Great Lunchbox Mystery, but I couldn't seem to turn my lunchbox experience into a story because I didn't know who the thieves were, and I don't want to know. Finally, I dashed off a description of the time I rode with my father when he was trucking a load of grapes down Highway 52. I put in things the sign said, like steep grade, trucks use low gear, and how Dad downshifted and how skillful he was at handling a long, heavy load on the curves. I put in the part about the hawks on the telephone wires and about the high peak where Black Bart's lookout used to watch for travelers coming through the pass so he could signal to Black Bart to rob them, and how the leaves on the trees along the stream at the bottom of the pass were turning yellow, and how good tons of grapes smelled in the sun. I left out the part about the waitress and the video games. Then I copied the whole thing over into case neatness counts and gave it to Miss Neely. Saturday, March 24th. Mom said I had to invite Barry over to our house for supper because I've been going to his house after school so often. I wasn't sure Barry would like to come to our house. It's really small compared to his, but he accepted. Mom cooked a casserole full of good things like ground beef, chilies, tortillas, tomatoes, and cheese. Barry said he really liked eating at our house. That made me happy. It feels good to have a friend. Barry said his burglar alarm system still works. The trouble is, his little sister thinks it's fun to open his door and set it off. They giggle and hide. This was driving his mom crazy. So finally, he had to disconnect it. Barry saw the sign on my door that said, "Keep out, Mom. That means you." He asked if my mom really stays out of my room. I said, "Sure, if I keep things picked up." My mom's not a snoop. Barry said he wished he could have a room nobody ever went into. I was glad Barry didn't ask to use the bathroom. Maybe I'll start scrubbing the mildew off of it after all. Sunday, March 25th. I keep thinking about Dad and how lonely he sounded and wondering what happened to that pizza boy. I don't like to think about Dad being lonesome, but I don't like to think about the pizza boy cheering him up either. And remember, the pizza boy is the young boy who asked his dad when they were going to order pizza. Tonight at supper, I got up the courage to ask Mom if she thought Dad would get married again. Well, I don't see how he could afford to. He has big payments to make on the truck, and the price of diesel oil goes up all the time. And when people can't afford to build houses or buy cars, he won't be hauling lumber or cars. And I thought this over. But he always sends my support payments, I said, even if he's late sometimes. Yes, he does. Your father is not a bad man. Suddenly, I was mad and disgusted with the whole thing. Then why don't you two get married again? I guess I wasn't very nice the way I said it. Mom looked me straight in the eye. Because your father will never grow up, she said. I knew that was all she would ever say about it. Tomorrow they give out the Young Writers Yearbook. Maybe I'll be lucky and get to have lunch with a famous author. Monday, March 26th. Today was not the greatest day of my life. When our class went to the library, I saw a stack of yearbooks and could hardly wait for Miss Neely to hand them out. When I finally got mine and opened the first page, there was a monster story, and I saw I did not win first prize. But then I turned to another page and I saw honorable mention under it. A Day on Dad's Rig by Lee M. Botts. There was my title with my name under it. I can't say I wasn't disappointed because I didn't win a prize. I was. I was really disappointed about not getting to meet the mysterious author, but I liked seeing my name in print. Some kids were mad they didn't win or even get anything printed. I figure you win some, you lose some. Then Miss Neely announced that the famous author, the winners would get to have lunch with Angela Badger. The girls were more excited than the boys because Angela Badger writes mostly about girls with problems like pimples or big feet. I'd still like to meet her because, as they say, she's a real live author. I'm glad Mr. Henshaw isn't the author because I would have been really disappointed if I didn't get to meet him. Friday, March 30th. Today turned out to be exciting. In the middle of second period, Miss Neely called me out of class and asked if I would like to have lunch with Angela Badger. I said sure, but how come? Miss Neely explained that the teachers discovered that the winning poem had been copied out of a book and was not an original, so the girl who submitted it would not be allowed to go. Miss Neely telephoned Mom at work for permission, and I gave my lunch to Barry because my lunches are better than his. The other winners were all dressed up, but I didn't care. I've noticed that authors like Mr. Henshaw usually wear old plaid shirts in the pictures on the back of their books. My shirt was just as old as his, so it was okay. Miss Neely drove us in her own car to the Holiday Inn, where some of the other librarians and their winners were waiting in the lobby. Then Angela Badger arrived with Mr. Badger, and we were all led into the dining room, which was pretty crowded. One of the librarians, who was a sort of super librarian, told the winners to sit at a long table with a sign that said reserved. Angela Badger sat in the middle, and some of the girls pushed to sit beside her. But then there I was, face to face with a real live author. I hadn't read any of her books, but the girls told me how much they loved her books. Nothing really seemed to happen until Miss Badger said, "Why don't we all go help ourselves to lunch at the salad bar?" What a mess. Some people didn't understand about salad bars, but Miss Badger led the way, and we helped ourselves to lettuce, bean salad, and everything else. A few of the younger kids were too short to reach anything but the bowls on the first rows. They weren't doing too well until Miss Badger helped them. Getting lunch took a long time, longer than it should have. We had to straighten this one boy out and explain to him that all we got was salad. He went back and got more salad. I was still trying to think of something interesting to say to Miss Badger while I chased beans around my plate with a fork. A couple of girls did the talking, telling Miss Badger how they wanted to write books just like hers. Miss Badger tried to get some of the shy people to say something without much luck, and I still couldn't think of anything to say about a lady who wrote books about girls with big feet or pimples. So finally, Miss Badger looked at me and said, "What did you write for the yearbook?" I felt myself turn red. "Oh, just something about a ride on a truck." "Oh," said Miss Badger, "so you're the author of A Day on a Dad's Rig." Everyone was quiet. None of us had known the real-life author would have read what we had written, but she had, and she remembered my title. "I just got honorable mention," I said, but I was thinking she called me an author. A real live author called me an author. "What difference does that make?" asked Miss Badger. "Judges never agree. I happen to really like A Day on a Dad's Rig." Because it was written by a boy who wrote honestly about something he knew and had strong feelings about. You made me feel what it is like to ride down a steep grade with tons of grapes behind me. "But I couldn't make it into a story," I said, feeling a whole lot braver. "Who cares? What do you expect? The ability to write stories comes later, when you have lived longer and have more understanding. A Day on a Dad's Rig was splendid work for a young boy your age. You wrote like you. You did not try to intimidate somebody else. This is one mark of a good writer." "Gee, thanks," was all I could say. Miss Badger, I said, did you ever meet Boyd Henshaw? Why, yes, she said. I once met him in a meeting of librarians where we were on the same program. What's he like? He's a very nice young man with a wicked twinkle in his eye. On the ride home, everyone was chattering about Miss Badger this and Miss Badger that. I didn't want to talk. I just wanted to think. A real live author called me an author. The gas station stopped pinging a long time ago, but I wanted to write all this down while I remembered. I'm glad tomorrow is Saturday. If I had to go to school, I would yawn. I wish Dad was here so I could tell him all about today. All right, we are getting close to the end. Thanks for sticking it out with me. March 31st. Dear Mr. Henshaw, I'll keep this short to save you time from reading, but I had to tell you something. You were right. I wasn't ready to write an imaginary story, but guess what? I wrote a true story which won honorable mention in the yearbook. Maybe next year I'll write something that will win first or second place. I just thought you'd like to know. Thank you for your help. If it hadn't been for you, I might have handed in that dumb story about the melting wax trucker. Your friend, the author, Lee Botts. P.S. I still write in the diary you started me on. All right, diary. So, from the diary of Lee Botts, Saturday, March 31st. The morning sun was shining, so Barry and I mailed my letter to Mr. Henshaw, then walked over to see if there were any butterflies in the grove. We only saw 3 or 4. I guess most of them have gone north. Then we walked down to the little park at Lover's Point and sat on a rock watching sailboats at the bay for a while. When the clouds began to blow in, we walked back to my house. A tractor without a trailer attached was parked in front. Dad's! I began to run. Dad and Bandit got out of the cab. So long, I gotta go, yelled Barry, who has heard a lot about Dad and Bandit and who understands about parents and divorce. Dad and I just stood there looking at one another until I said, Hi, Dad. Seen any shoes on the highway lately? Lots of them. Dad grinned a half grin, not like his old self. Boots, sneakers, all kinds. Bandit came over to me, wagging his tail and looking happy. He was wearing a new red bandana around his neck. How you doing, kid? Asked Dad. I brought your dog back. So Lee is finally seeing his dad and Bandit. Gee, thanks, I said, hugging Bandit. Dad's stomach hung over his belt, and he wasn't as tall as I remembered. You've grown, he said. Did Dad expect me to stop growing just because he hadn't been around? How'd you find Bandit? By asking every day over my CB. I finally got an answer from a trucker who said he picked up a lost dog in a snowstorm in the Sierra, a dog that was still riding with him. Last week, we turned up at the same line at a weigh scale. I'm sure glad you got him back. How come you're not hauling anything? I hoped he would say he had driven all the way from Bakersfield just to bring Bandit back to me. Well, I'm waiting for a reefer to be loaded with broccoli and Salinas, he told me. Since it wasn't far, I thought I'd take a run over here before I take off to Ohio. So Dad came just to see me because of broccoli. After all these months, when I had longed to see him, it took a load of broccoli to get him here. I felt let down and my feelings hurt. They hurt so much I couldn't think of anything to say. Just then, Mom drove up and got out of her old car, which looked a little and shabby beside Dad's big rig. Hello, Bill, she said. Hello, Bonnie, he said. We all just stood there with Bandit waving his tail until Dad said, Aren't you going to ask me to come in? Sure, come on in, said Mom. Bandit followed us down the walk past the duplex to our little house and came inside with us. How about a cup of coffee? Mom asked Dad. Sure, agreed Dad, looking around. So is this where you two live? Then he sat down on the couch. This is where we live as long as we can pay the rent, said Mom in a flat voice, and it can never be towed away. Mom really hated that mobile home we used to live in. Dad looked tired and sad in a way I had never seen him look before. While Mom fussed around making coffee, I showed him the burglar alarm I made for my lunchbox. He said, I always knew I had a smart kid. Mom was taking such a long time making coffee, I felt I had to entertain Dad, so I showed him my yearbook and what I had written. He read it and said, Funny, but I still think about that every day. Every time I haul grapes to a winery. I'm glad you remember it too. That made me feel good. He looked at me a while as if he expected to see, I don't know what. Then he rumpled in my hair and said, You're smarter than your old man. And that embarrassed me. I didn't know how to answer. Finally, Mom brought in 2 mugs of coffee. She gave one to Dad and carried hers over to a chair. They just sat there looking at one another. I wanted to yell, do something, say something, don't just sit there. Finally, Dad said, I miss you, Bonnie. I had a feeling. I didn't want to hear this conversation, but I didn't know how to get out of there. So I got down on the floor and hugged Bandit, who rolled over on his back to have his stomach scratched, just as if he'd never been away. I'm sorry, said Mom. I think she meant she was sorry Dad missed her, or maybe she was sorry about everything. I don't know. Have you found someone else? Asked Dad. No, said Mom. I think about you a lot on the long hauls, said Dad, especially at night. I haven't forgotten you, said Mom. Bonnie, is there any chance? Dad began. No, said Mom in a sad, soft voice. There is not a chance. Why not? Asked Dad. Too many lonely days and nights not knowing where you were. Too much waiting for phone calls you forgot to make because you were whooping it up at some truck stop, said Mom. Too many boring Saturday nights in a noisy tavern. Too many broken promises. Things like that. Well, Dad said and set his mug down, that's what I came to find out. So I might as well be going. He hadn't even finished his coffee. He stood up and so did I. Then he gave me a big hug, and for a minute, I wanted to hang on to him and never let him go. So long, son, he said. I'll try to get over to see you more often. Sure, Dad, I said. I had learned by now that I couldn't count on anything he said. Mom came to the door, and suddenly Dad hugged her, and to my surprise, she hugged him back. Then he turned and ran down the steps. When he reached his rig, he called back, Take good care of Bandit. I thought of Dad hauling a 40-foot refrigerator trailer full of broccoli over the Sierra and Rockies and across the plains and all those places in my book of road maps until he got to Ohio. Personally, I would be happy to see all the broccoli in California trucked to Ohio because it's not my favorite vegetable. But I didn't like to think of Dad alone on that long haul, driving all day and mostly all night, except when he snatched a few hours of sleep in his bunk and thinking about Mom. Dad, wait, I yelled and ran out to him. You keep Bandit. You need him more than I do. Dad hesitated until I said, Please take him. I don't have any way to amuse him. Dad smiled and whistled, and Bandit jumped into the cab as if that's what he really wanted to do all along. So long, Lee, Dad said, and started the motor. Then he leaned out and said, You're a good kid, Lee, and I'm proud of you. I'll try not to let you down. Then as he drove off, he yelled, See you around, and sounded more the way I had remembered him. When I went inside, Mom was sipping her coffee and sort of staring into space. I went into my room, shut the door, and sat listening to the gas station go ping, 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 ping. Maybe it was broccoli that brought Dad to Salinas, but he had come the rest of the way because he really wanted to see us. He really missed us. I felt sad and a whole lot better at the same time. All right, and that is the end of Dear Mr. Henshaw. So we learned a lot about Lee's life. He started writing when he was in 2nd grade. You know, he's into middle school now, so we got to see how his letters got better. He got to open up a little bit through his writing. It helped him deal with, his parents' divorce. It helped him deal with the way he felt about his dad, who wasn't always there for him. So I hope you enjoyed it. All right, we will do a very quick Zoom meeting on Zoom. So check your Canvas inbox for that. See y'all in a minute. Bye.